Hey, everybody, just 1 second. Thank you for understanding. We just had a little technical glitch, but my name is Bruce Brown, and I am the president of Tabletop Alliance. So thank you for understanding. Yay, the 21st century, right? But in all of this, you might be like, what is Tabletop Alliance, and what is this webinar that I'm about to be going through? So what Tabletop Alliance is we're a nonprofit 501c3 here in the United States. And what we're here for is to really equip educators and community leaders with the power of gaming. Games can have a profound impact in people's lives. They can teach a lot of really cool lessons. They can simulate things that honestly you can't simulate other ways. And there's been some really cool research going on in PhD communities, things like that, for the last good number of years. However, it's really in quiet voices. And so what we're here to do today is to raise up the great work that is going on to make the awareness of the power of gaming more prevalent and to help equip you with how to use games by learning the lessons of people that are doing it. And so if that sounds like something of interest to you, I highly encourage you to also hop on over to our Facebook page, Tabletop Alliance, learn more about us, tabletopalliance.org. And also, we've got 2 more upcoming webinars after this one. So we've got another one on March 3rd. That's going to be with a school teacher in Philadelphia. His name is Max. Max teaches business classes for his high school students, and he uses games to teach the outcomes of his class, as well as teaches an after-school program that utilizes games. That's part of the video game network, but he also brings in his own board games. Then one you definitely don't want to miss besides Max's is going to be happening on March 17th. And that is going to be a presentation by Mika with Asmodee Research. So he is over in Paris, France. And Asmodee, if you're not familiar with them, Asmodee is the largest hobby game producer in the world. So they're right up there for our industry. They are the people. And so over the last couple of years, they've actually been funding and supporting research endeavors on games helping with dementia, games helping with different things in different settings. They just held a game symposium the other day and bringing together some PhD researchers from around the world to share their progress. That is available. It's called Game in Lab. And so if you want to sign up for either of those 2 webinars, please make sure to go do that over on tabletopalliance.org/events. But with that, I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit and give some context about our current presenter, and that is Matthew Pinchuk of All Aboard Games. And so Matthew and I date back coming up on a year, honestly. And in this interesting year of a lot of more digital things, I was going through the Book of Faces and happened to stumble upon this post of all these hobby games and this picture of this person in a classroom doing these cool things. And I reached out because at that point we had already planted the seed of wanting to do something to help educators. And so I wanted to reach out and see and benchmark about some cool things going on in the world, which led me to Matthew. And so Matthew is based up in Canada, and he's been doing some amazing work over the last couple of years with All Aboard Games. And he has been working not only in the education sector, but also with some crisis relief and then some other interesting things in this COVID world that I can't wait for you to hear about. And so what I wanted to do is I'm going to bring Matthew on right now so we can kind of share the screen. And today is really going to be a conversation with Matthew, but really what I want to do for you is what I heard from Matthew, what I heard from you when we were talking was so inspiring and has left some pretty lasting marks that that your story needs to be told to more people. And so that's why I'm so thankful to have you here today. I'm going to just relinquish the floor to you. So if you want to introduce a little bit more about yourself, the whole thing of All Aboard Games, and really just talk about your experience and what you've been doing, because it's absolutely amazing.
Sure. So, I'll give you a little brief summary of, how we started and where I kind of decided to make this change in my life. So I was working as a scientist for about 10 years. Decided I've had enough. It wasn't rewarding enough for me at that point. And so I quit without kind of knowing really what I wanted to do. And I looked at my collection of games, which at that time was pretty significant, in the hundreds. And I remembered how much I enjoyed just, playing games and being around the younger generation. And I just thought, maybe there's a way for me to combine these two passions of mine and actually maybe earn a living doing it. So I reached out to a few people in my city in Montreal, and we got to talking about it on how to implement certain programs in schools using board games. And when we started, we went ahead with asking schools if they wanted us to come in and kind of run an extracurricular activity using hobby games. And it was hard because a lot of people don't know the hobby game industry. So, presenting board games to certain individuals, they might think, well, we have board games already. We have Candyland, Monopoly, Connect Four. The kids don't touch them. Well, the idea was, let's show them some new games, something that's a little bit more engaging, a little bit more fun. So we started entering schools, and it was a slow start. But we eventually started to realize something that, maybe there was more to it. Maybe we could implement different programs. Maybe it just wasn't going to be for fun. Maybe there was something behind this, something more concrete, something that we can use in the classroom. So we decided to kind of develop these two programs. One was based on social emotional learning. So when you play a board game, you go through quite a few emotions, and you have to sort of manage those emotions. I mean, everyone knows, being a good winner is important. Cooperating when you're playing a game because you're all participating in this activity. There's some that are right on the surface, but then there's other ones that are a little bit deeper down. So something like self-regulation, like that guy took my spot. I'm really upset about it. Maybe we should work on it. So we started to develop this program where every week, or at least on a consistent basis, we would go into a school, kids that struggled with social emotional learning or behaviors, or certain kids that were deemed special needs, or from a lower socioeconomic background, just kids that needed a little bit of a boost. That's where we introduced this program to. And we worked on these emotions kind of intrinsically, I want to say. The game kind of brings them out, and then you're kind of forced to reel them back in and gain some control. And so we did that, and it was really successful. And a lot of other schools asked about it. We were able to go into a lot of special needs schools and implement these programs, and it was lots of fun. And from my observations, it made a big impact. Now, we really wanted to quantify this impact, and we were all set up to kind of run this relatively big study where we were going to gather some information on these students and see kind of what this program produced in terms of, their social emotional learning moving forward. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit. We weren't really able to do that just yet. But we're still in discussions to get it done when we can. Now, the other program we had which I really like, is the board game design program. So it's like a multi-week program where we go into the classroom and, we introduce the students to hobby games. Then we kind of teach them the fundamentals of, how to prototype something, how to prototype a game, how to play test that game. And then we provide them these board game design kits where they get to work in a group of 4 or 5 students, and actually design a professional quality game, not paper and cardboard per se, but like we give them a real quad folding board, a deck of playing cards, whole bunch of tokens, a whole bunch of meeples, dice, all sorts of things that they get to keep and design this game as they see fit. And I was super impressed with the engagement level of the students doing this. They just bought into it immediately. Making something that you're sort of making something the way that you want to make it, and then being able to actually use that thing, sort of play it, is super rewarding for them. And that program is by far our strongest in terms of cross-curricular learning and even deep learning per se. If you're familiar with deep learning, not the computer programming deep learning, but deep learning in terms of the 6 C's of learning. So that was what we did. And then, like I said, the pandemic hit and everything sort of slowed down here. Currently, we're in very few schools at the moment because schools are not really allowing outsiders to come in. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. But things are slowly opening up, and it looks like after the spring break, we'll be in a few more schools. So this year will be slow, but I think next year will be really good again. Now, that was essentially the program and the business. Then there's, what I've been doing lately, which is I had all these board games just lying around, maybe like over 1,000 games just sitting here doing nothing. In my opinion, these games should be played. So I sort of reached out to my community and I decided that I would lend our games out to the community. And my main goal was trying to encourage families that aren't familiar with hobby games to try them out. Maybe they'll enjoy them. Maybe they'll get into the hobby. And so I put up that offer, and in a really short period of time, and they're still coming in, I got request after request to borrow games. I think we've lent out over 400 games now. Some have been returned. Some are still out there. Crossing my fingers that they all come back, but I think they will. So we kind of just encouraged families to play together. I mean, in Montreal right now, we're under a curfew at 8 o'clock at night, so there's not much to do. And so I thought it was a perfect opportunity for these families to explore this hobby and see if it was something that they could get into, and see if it was something that could, encourage some family time instead of, being around the TV. We've even been able to kind of, when families borrowed games that were slightly more complex than they expected, we've been able to like Zoom and teach them over Zoom and watch them enjoy it, and it has been great. There's a question there. What do you think, Bruce? Should I answer the questions? Whatever. Do you want me to?
Just loving hearing this, and it's a little reflection from one of our attendees of designing a game in an honors English class and the power of that, right? Yeah, absolutely, about the wrinkle in time, right? Now I remember when you and I were chatting the other day about some of these designs, and there was one you were rather proud of that you were talking about. Why don't you kind of share about that? Because I'd love to hear it. I think it's fun.
Sure. Yeah.
Also, I'm curious, and I think some of our attendees would be curious too. Obviously, you're working with people who might not be gamers by trade. And so I'm curious of what kinds of games they were designing that you saw these outcomes with.
Okay. So, so when we would introduce this hobby game world to these students, we kind of have the step-by-step protocol is essentially we come in, we show them 2 games that involve moving your player pieces with either set collection or just card choice. So these were mechanics that we thought were very different from what they're used to, the roll and move aspect of most games. And we wanted to show them this because we thought they were simple enough mechanisms that they could include them in their own designs, because we ultimately want them to create a game that involves choice. We don't want it to be purely luck dependent. We want them to have control on their turn. So we're showing them these mechanisms they're not used to so they can add those elements in. One game in particular, I think the one that Bruce is talking about, was designed by a group in a grade 5 class called Taco Cave Run. And this game was amazing. They created this kind of a pretty basic board design. It was sort of a circular type of roll and move design, but they had a few little shortcuts around it. So there were some branching paths, and they could have those options of which path to take. The idea was you're going to this cave and you're trying to collect your specific gems. Okay. But in this cave are a bunch of killer tacos. There's little tacos that will take off 1 damage. There is a daddy taco that's extremely mean and will send you back to the start if you get caught. But then they decided that they were going to add a little mommy taco element. And that mommy taco element was the thing that I liked the most. Because if you got the mommy taco, she would actually join your side and defend you against the daddy taco. They had all sorts of other little things that they added, like you can take a shortcut to get a magic sword, and that would block 1 taco from damaging you. I can't quite remember how they had their movement structured, but it wasn't a roll and move game. I believe they used cards. So it's just a super cute design and a really wacky theme, and like that's what kids do, right? They're super creative. They're probably more creative than adults. And they just roll with it. They don't overthink it. They just do it. They put it down and they make it work. Is it perfect? Probably not, but it's super fun. And, you know, it's a great starting point. If they were to do another iteration of it, it would probably be even better.
That's amazing. That's amazing, right? Like kids are resilient. Children can really showcase, like we all have all those things of kids can showcase such amazing things that are positive in the world and see things that we just can't, right?
Yeah.
Now, we do have a question in the chat from Matthew, and Matthew asks, how do you set up your lending library that you put together? Did you put it together based around the types of content, the play style? I'm going to throw in there too of mechanics or theme. Just kind of, how'd you do that?
Nothing. 0. I am not that organized, and I really didn't. The goal was not to get gamers to come borrow games. I never intended it to work like that. My audience, the people that I want to show games to, are the people that don't play games. There's enough people out there that are you know, making content for or targeting gamers already. You don't need me for that. So my idea is to, you know, get more people into the hobby. So I would simply, you know, have a quick chat with the family that wanted to borrow a game. I would find out if they, you know, what their level of gaming is, if they've played any potential hobby games, maybe even Catan, you know, or Ticket to Ride, something a little bit more mainstream. I'd ask the ages of the kids because I would base everything on that first and foremost. I would, yeah. Onig writes in the chat, he's like, I just said, hey, try this game. I just give them a game. but they're good. So I kind of would read the family and the dynamic a little bit and do the best I can. And then I would pick out kind of a few different types of games, you know, maybe one dexterity game, maybe one card game that's about 15 minutes, maybe something a little bit more complex. And I'd give them these 3 games, and I would just see if they would try it, and I would want their opinion. You know, if they tried a game and they really didn't like it, they tell me they didn't like it, they bring it back, I give them something else to try. So there was really not an extensive amount of thought put into how to build a lending library. It was really just you know, you tell me your situation, I'll give you some games to try, and then worst case scenario, you just bring them back and get some new ones. There's no fees or anything like that. So it's really just as if you play them, then you play them. That's all.
I think that's amazing. And yeah, I think it's awesome that they're like, yeah, you're just going to try these 3 and you kind of walk away. He's like, here it is. And you walk away.
That's it. You know, I'll point out some, you know, maybe, you know, you need some help with rules. Feel free to ask me. If you want to watch a video online, I can point the way for you. But the majority of parents, and this is the most impressive part. So, you know, it's the parents that have to learn these games, and they're not necessarily used to reading, you know, even a 10-page rule book, right? But they did it. They did it because there's not much else to do, and this is a great. They realize right away, I can do this with my kids, and so they do it. They just put in the work. And it's rewarding, and they see it right away, and they're hooked. I think I've gotten tons of messages, you know, we love this one. Where can we buy it? You know, so now I know. I'm like, now they will think, oh, next birthday, maybe I should buy another board game, you know, instead of something else. So That's what I want to see. That was the purpose.
I think there's thought with some people, and that is, yes, obviously, I'm so glad you love this game, but I think there's the other part of it too. Has anybody reached out to you and said what it has done for their family in this space?
I mean, no one's really put it in words, but they do send pictures. I've received a lot of pictures, and you can see, you can tell, you know, they're having a good time. And the fact that they come back and they say, "We really, really liked this game. Do you have another game that's very similar to it?" Or, "We've played this one, and I think we're ready for the next step up, like something a little bit more complex," you know? So those are the kind of reactions I've had from people that have borrowed them. And so you can tell, I mean, you see it in a picture. They're enjoying themselves, and you know they've sat down for like an hour and a half playing a game. So that's always a good thing to do with your family.
And that is good. And it sounds like what you're saying is reading between the lines a little bit.
Totally.
What you're able to pick up, because I mean, photos are sort of qualitative data in themselves. And so it is important. And so Matthew has another question for us. Have teachers or families put together any sort of pairing of education standards with your game design program or the games that you've given people to try?
So they haven't necessarily put together specific lesson plans. The teachers themselves have observed what the curricular connections are with the games that we've introduced. So I'm not a teacher, but I know what it is to learn. And I've always thought that if I can show these kids, these students, that they can learn a game in about 20 minutes and then apply what they've learned, that to me is more beneficial than something specific to the curriculum. You know, learning to learn is kind of my bread and butter. It's what I've always tried to preach, you know, that you can learn anything if you know how to learn. If you know how to digest information and apply it, then you can learn anything. So that's what they see first and foremost, but they also do see these curricular connections. You know, you use a game like Secret Code 13+4, which is a habit game for kids, and essentially you're trying to escape, you're trying to break into a museum and steal some sort of ancient relic, and you got to crawl through these laser grids. Now the laser grids are all randomly numbered from 6 to 15 or something like that, and you have 2 dice and you roll them, no more than 2 dice, I think it's 5 dice actually. You roll them and you use them in any sort of arithmetic, like manipulate them however you want, adding, subtracting, multiplication, division, however you want, to try and reach these. Oneg's asking what kind of scientist are, kind of reach these numbers so that laser grid. So it's like, it's apparent to them, well, we're doing kind of that quick arithmetic in the head sort of thing, and they love it. You know, then there's games that are language based, and it's very obvious. Remember, this is mostly elementary school. We didn't necessarily go into the higher levels with the games because there's some other challenges there. I mean, teachers don't necessarily have time. Scheduling is a lot different than in an elementary school. But I'm currently working in a high school, and I bring games in all the time, constantly. I'm probably playing. I'm in a class, about 2 classes every day, you know, introducing games. And I've showed teachers science-based games, and they'll let me kind of break out a group and we'll play that game, and it's totally related to the curriculum that they're doing at the moment. Right now, even for like Black History Month, I showed a bunch of teachers the game Freedom, the Underground Railroad, and they're super interested. They want to see how we can implement this. So teachers are very into it, and they see it, and it's now fallen into onto my lap to try and build something a little bit more solid in terms of curricular connections.
So it sounds like it's been these kind of, you're obviously bringing in all these games,
yeah,
and you're using them intentionally. Obviously, the use of Freedom of the Underground Railroad, like that's an amazing game to be using in the month of February.
Yeah.
But within that, it sounds like you're leaning towards having to get a little bit more formal as they're becoming more used to it. So kind of getting in a pattern or curriculum type thing.
That's right. Yeah.
What's your thought process in terms of getting set up for that, or any words of encouragement or somebody at that stage?
So, yeah, I mean, I was working with a few teachers recently to try and build those programs a little bit more specific to the curriculum, and a few organizations here in Montreal, specifically one that caters to the entire English language school system, specifically for lower socioeconomic families. And they work very closely with our education branch of the government. And so we've been kind of exploring certain games, seeing how we can implement lesson plan style gaming sessions. And it's going really well. It's tricky because, games are very specific. And there's maybe a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but is it enough to say, oh, here's a lesson plan about it? It's been tricky, but we're working on that. The teachers really just love the build your own game aspect because it hits on so many different learning aspects, just like very cross curricular, nothing so specific, but that's the one that they are really keen on right now.
That makes sense, because obviously someone is designing a game for their purposes and it might not match completely. But that game design thing is actually something that I've been working with a professor at Austin Community College here in Texas. They're doing that within their climate change class. Mm-hmm. This is the first time she's ever done that. And so it's been a little trepidatious, right? Mm-hmm. But she said the students are loving it. She doesn't have a background in game design, anything like that, but she's willing to lean in and try. And so within that game design space of, if you've never done that yourself, if you've never introduced it to your class and you're wanting students to demonstrate those core concepts, what advice would you give to somebody wanting to do that, to go that route?
Sure. I would say the best starting point is introduce a game that everyone is familiar with, or a game that's simple enough that doesn't require a lot. It's not complex. We just want to keep it very basic. And then from that point, I would say provide them with additional components. Doesn't matter what they are. It can be random bits and pieces from other games, random cards from whatever you find, and challenge them to change the game, to modify the game. That exercise in itself is great. And you always try and relate it to something they might know. Like, we use a game called Monza, which is it's a kid's game. It's meant for 4 or 5 year olds. It's a racing game where there's a number of spots on the track that are of different colors. And when you roll these dice, they're 6-sided dice, and each side has a different color. And you use one die at a time to move to a spot that's connected to you that matches that color. So it's very simple. It's a roll and move, but there's a little bit of choice in there on both the path you're going to take and the dice you have. Now, we play that once, and then I throw them a whole bunch of colored cubes. And I ask them to turn this game into Mario Kart, because it's generally something that they're familiar with. And if they're not, I kind of give them a brief explanation. And then all of a sudden they're there and they're adding rules to a game and they're doing game design, but they have this starting point. So they don't feel so overwhelmed. They can add one rule at a time. They learn how to test it. For instance, a blue cube. Okay, these can represent kind of like an ice block. So maybe I can drop this off of my car and the next person that hits it is frozen for a turn. They miss a turn or something like that. And they try this. They see if it's fun. They see if it works, if it makes sense. And then they decide whether or not to continue. They can remove the rule or they can add a new rule. Maybe a red cube is like a red turtle and you can shoot it 2 spaces ahead of you. So they come up with these. We kind of give them suggestions. I think it's important to be familiar with other game mechanisms if you're trying to do this, because the students sometimes need a little bit of a push. And if you don't have those ideas ready, or you can't show them something they could add, then I think that's detrimental. I think they need to see an example often, and then they need to understand play testing. That's imperative. Like, it's so important for them to realize if this game's going to work. Does the starting player win always? That means your game's imbalanced, right? So they need to play these games and really, really not try to enjoy them. It's part of it, but really analyze it as they go. And that's our role. And that would be the teacher's role. That would be trying to implement something like this.
I think that's amazing. So just to reflect what you were just saying there, you said, have them play a game that's easy to learn, easy to consume, and then from there, make a modification. So you might not be doing your modification towards your educational purposes yet, but first you're introducing that, make a change, make your change, and then you can say, now make a change reflected to this class. It sounds like you're saying. That's amazing. Yeah. It's layered learning. It's sequenced. And just one quick resource for people out there, if you're curious about board game mechanisms and stuff, you can always check out Jeff Engelstein's book, the Encyclopedia of Game Mechanisms. But all of this is also listed on the Board Game Geek website as a hyperlinked. It's the taxonomy for that's on there if you're curious.
It's amazing that there's a book about that, right?
There's another one.
I know.
With another one just recently. It's currently like test copies right now. So Matthew, we're almost up on time, and I'm curious, what has this done for you? How has this filled your bucket? How does this get you pumped in, like wanting to get out the door when you can get out the door? How is this inspiring you to do more?
Yeah, I'm like ecstatic. This is the best job you could have. You get to enjoy the hobby that you love so much, and you get to bring more people in. And it's not just people, it's like kids, and the joy that they have from playing games and experiencing this hobby that you've been experiencing for so long. I mean, it's super rewarding. Like, I'm not just saying that. It really, really is. Like, I'm really nervous when I go into a class. I'm nervous that the kids aren't going to like the games, or it's not going to be an enjoyable activity for them. And I swear, every single time, it's amazing. Like, I leave and I'm so overjoyed with the reactions. I love when they're like, this game is awesome, and where do I buy this game, and are you coming back? And that's great. I mean, it really is fun, and I'm so happy that I get to reach out to families in my community and just show them this too. It's better than my old job. I don't make nearly as much, but it's way better.
Well, the fact that you're doing that, the fact that you're hearing from these families, you're hearing from these kids, these children wanting you to come back, right? These students, and they just can't wait for you to come back. I remember you telling me about that, and that was just so inspiring. Of all the other programs they could go through in a week, they couldn't wait for you. And that's really awesome. As we're wrapping up, how can people learn more about your work? How can people learn more about All Aboard Games and continue to follow you on this amazing journey?
So I'm not like a huge social media guy, but we do have a Facebook page, All Aboard Games. I do sometimes try to post in, board game groups and stuff like that, but mostly in my community. You can come and see the different type of programs that we've run at our site, www.allaboardgameskids.com. And so we kind of have a layout of all the things that we offer, some testimonials and stuff. But that's about it, really. I mean, the website and Facebook is it for me. I am not big on the social media side of things, unfortunately, for me, probably.
I completely get that. I think detaching from social media can be very healthy. But I think that's amazing. So you can go to your website, they can go to the Facebook and things and reach out. And I do know you're pretty responsive in Messenger. I will say that.
Messenger, yeah. People have reached out and not even joined my Facebook page, but they see it and they get an understanding of what I do. I've gone just, what do you recommend for my kid? He's 6 years old. And I'll answer. I mean, it doesn't bother me whatsoever.
Well, I just need to commend you on what you've been doing, and in the fact of, with everything going on, you're lending out this library of games. So thank you for speaking into like managing that, the trust that you put into that, but then also meeting people where they're at and offering that support, but then challenge to kind of grow them as a gamer too and grow them in this hobby. It sounds like you just keep doing amazing things. I'm very thankful that we were able to get you on here to share about this. And so, in closing, thank you for watching. And thank you, Matthew, for being with us for all of this today. This was our first webinar for Tabletop Alliance, so thank you so much for being here. Again, we've got 2 more coming up that you do not want to miss. So we've got that one on the 3rd of March with Max, talking about using them in a high school games class and an after-school program. And then on March 17th, we're going to be having Misha with Asmodee Research. Sorry, I've been saying all aboard games this whole time, but Asmodee Research over in Paris, France, sharing about the Game and Lab program and how they're supporting games in education and games towards different outcomes. And so if you're interested in following along about any of those, you can go to tabletopalliance.org, and that's all on the events tab. I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We're sending out about a monthly newsletter. And then besides that, also hop on over to the Facebook and see all the great things going on there and join our community. So thank you so much for attending this webinar, and I can't wait to see you at an upcoming one. Thank you again, Matthew, and y'all have a great night.